sure. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Pastor Gail, and hello to everybody at home. My name is Madison. This is my colleague, Michael. We've already been introduced, so we will get right to it. We are here to talk about college planning tonight. And we work for Thrivent. I just want to say quickly for those of you who don't know that Thrivent is a place that's the best of both worlds. We are a Fortune 500 financial advisory firm, and we are a not-for-profit. We started in the Lutheran Church. We still have roots here, and we still do a lot of work here. So Michael and I are both advisors, but as part of our practice, we really emphasize community engagement and outreach and education. That is what tonight is all about. Education, getting some context around the college planning process, some framework for you, knowing what to look for in the process and what might be most important for you, and giving you some tangible takeaways that you can use at any part in this process. So we're going to do that by covering a few broad things today. We're going to talk about the cost of college and what that actually means, because it's not as simple as it sounds. We're going to be talking about building a strong college strategy. That can be broken into really 3 areas of planning: things around admissions, things around academics, and of course, the things we like to nerd out about, the financials. We'll wrap it up and say why it all matters. We'll also leave you with some contact information. Love that questions will be coming in throughout this presentation. Those are the things we love to spend time on. So we'll do our best to get you all some consolidated answers at the end. All right. I think we should kick off with current events, Michael, because we're in COVID, everything's weird, and we just want to name that.
So again, thank you, Madison, and for kicking things off here. One of the things that we talk about in our college planning strategies is the fact that that it is a constant landscape change, a changing landscape. And with current events more than ever, we've learned that COVID has taught us that uncertainty is really difficult to deal with. And then when you add the stress of other things that are ever present in our lives, one of them being planning for college, it magnifies. And so when you take some of the things that are happening in the college landscape, the changes that we're experiencing right now warrant to be addressed or at least brought up, even though that's not going to be the core content of everything we cover today. We're going to look at the broader landscape, but we want to acknowledge things like the Secure Act that was enacted in December of 2019 that changed fundamentally how 529 plans can be used in the college and education landscape. The CARES Act that was enacted as part of the COVID relief response that changed how some of the student lending, at least in the immediate terms, is being handled, as well as funds that were provided to college institutions to help weather the storm, so to speak. And then we take the other responses of the higher education landscape that we're starting to see real time right now. This just happened a couple weeks ago. If you noticed, Concordia Moorhead enacted a $15,000 permanent tuition cut. That's a potential significant ripple effect that could happen throughout the local private schools throughout the Midwest. We don't know how that's going to play out. Wells College in Aurora, New York, they did a $25,000 tuition cut. Schools are responding in a real-time way that is something that we could have never anticipated just 9 short months ago. Other things that are happening, that maybe you saw this just recently in the Star Tribune. Schools, hundreds of schools have moved into test-free or test-optional admissions processes. We're also finding that some of these schools are actually going to forgo the standardized testing in their admissions process even after we go through this pandemic. Significant change in something that's been a decade present in the admissions process. We also can look at more institutional information. I realize this is small font, but if you look into what this is sort of an information hub for higher education, that enrollments are down. They're not meeting quotas for the fall. We're seeing record numbers of deferments. We're seeing a significant minority changing their admissions policies, and what this is the school response, the institutional response, and how that affects you as a consumer and your family in this college process. All these things are ever changing, but the landscape we're going to cover tonight, the planning strategies that we think are going to be stable and are going to be ever present in some form, is what we'll really try to highlight as we look at the rest of the time tonight. So, as we talked about the landscape, we want to start by just helping you understand what we're looking at. And some of that starts with basic definitions. So when we talk about these terminology, these terms are going to come up throughout the presentation, but specifically looking at what we call the cost of attendance versus the out-of-pocket cost. It's a key takeaway. If there's one thing you take away from the evening, one of them will be remembering that it's the out-of-pocket cost that matters. If you were to go to Google and look at any institution and just Google the institution and cost of attendance, most likely you're going to land on admissions or financial aid page detailing the cost of attendance of that particular institution. What that entails are those things you see on the slide here, these 5 things: the tuition and fees, books and supplies, room and board, transportation and personal expense allowances deemed by that particular school. But we're not worried about that. That's the equivalent of the sticker price on that car when you walk onto the auto dealership lot. What we want to know is what you're going to actually pay out of pocket to drive that degree off the parking lot. Okay, bad joke. But the out-of-pocket cost is what we're looking at to try to understand. Second, our world today loves data, big data. We hear about it all the time. Statistics are valuable to us to understand the landscape we're in, to understand the relative importance of information. But it's also very important that you understand the perspective or the context of that information. If we were to look at here and based on 2018 and 2019, 52% of first-year students got a tuition discount, 46% all through their undergraduate years. If we look at the first-year student, had 91% of them got some sort of institutional grant, that's free money, and 76% through those undergraduate years. That sounds awesome. Sounds like college is on a discount, yet we hear the exact opposite. But what we have to remember, if we just go back to that last slide, tuition is only one part of that cost of attendance. What also we have to point out is college is one of the most complex financial equations in solving, in that every unique case is different. While there's a common cost of attendance, anyone's out-of-pocket cost could vary drastically by their financial situation, their family structure, their unique circumstances that can only apply by household. Conventional wisdom is dangerous in college planning. Doing what your neighbor or your friend or your relatives have done may not be the best decision for you. I'll give one quick example as we kind of give as a real-life example that happened this fall. St. Olaf, very well recognized and prestigious local private college in Northfield, has a cost of attendance of $65,000. Working with a family this fall, that's not actually Bethany, we've changed the name, that student's first year out-of-pocket cost is going to be about $18,400. It's almost a 70% discount from cost of attendance. Now, I'm sure anyone would love to have a 70% discount on school. However, this is not a completely unique situation. They're not in dire financial needs. This household actually has a 6-figure household income. They have about $1.5 million in invested assets. They own their home, and yet that is their reality. Now, I'm not going to say that's typical or overpromise, but that is how different it can be for one family, even in a strong financial position, understanding the landscape. Now, as we look at the landscape, what else is important to know is that we're not answering the same equation or figuring out the same problem that we did when you or I maybe went to school as a parent. Now, that there are simple factors of supply and demand that have changed. The globalization that's happened throughout the world that has required higher levels of education for certain professions. There are more students coming from international. We simply have a higher population, creating more demand for places in our institutions. And institutions to attract more students have created more amenities, simply raising that cost of attendance. And you can see it in this chart. What you see is actually that relative to the rest of inflation to the broader economy, how that's affected our world. One last slide here before we really get into the content. understanding the difference between undergraduate and private institution cost of attendances. Again, the averages are great ways to look at the landscape, but they're very, when you apply to any one institution, it looks different. In the four-year space in the public institution, the average you see is about $26,000. Current day, if you look at St. Cloud State, it's about $21,000. Whereas the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is nearing $29,000. Split the difference and you see the average. Take the private sector at $54,000. The private institutions, Concordia St. Paul is about $33,000, whereas McAllister this year, $71,000. Split the difference, you see where we're going to use that general number between 25 to 50,000. Now, what I point out to this is if we're going to look at a solution for something that may cost $100,000 to $200,000 as a household problem to solve, we often hear families come in and say, college, that's our daughter or son's thing. We'll let them decide where they want to go and we'll figure it out. And I would put this akin to a home remodeling project. I'm guessing you're not going to let your 16, 17, 18-year-old go out and make the commitment to a contractor for a massive remodeling project without holding their hand a little bit. Because ultimately, you're going to be signing some of those checks, most likely. Making sure that they are making informed, intentional, and decisions in this process is imperative in the landscape that we see today. It's not the same one that we grew up in maybe 20 or 30 years ago. One last thing with this is we often have associated that with a college education comes higher income. That was a justification. That's what I grew up knowing. The more education you get, the more income you will have in that. And that is true. By statistically, Bureau of Labor and Statistics suggests that the lifetime earnings of a college graduate is going to be between $1 and $2 million more than a non-graduate. But I would present to you today that that's not really why we would do it. It's not for the income. What I would point to is the unemployment rates of those with higher education. We all know through the 2009 bubble, and we know what's happened in the last 10 months, what even a short period of unemployment can do to a household's finances. It can be devastating for years following. Improving the possibility of employment, I would argue, is just as powerful as the potential income. Mm-hmm. So, as we build that strong strategy, there's three areas we're going to cover on in the time we have. We're going to talk about admissions, the academics, and then the actual financial piece. I'm going to hand it off to Madison, given her unique background, to speak a little bit about this admissions part as we look in the first of these three areas.
Thank you, Michael. So we don't come here to talk about admissions because we're pretending to be admissions experts, right? We talk about admissions because this is where it all starts, and because this is where you get to decide what the actual value of your college experience is going to be, right? We want to make sure that the dollars you do spend on college, no matter how many dollars it ends up being, are worth it to you, that you get out of this what you really need and want to get out of this. We like to front load the college selection process a lot because there's a lot you can do up front to vet out the things you might not need or enjoy so much and really go after what will help you be a better learner, be a more holistic person, have that employable factor, have a successful college experience. I did work in admissions at Princeton Seminary, which was great. I worked with schools from all around the country, and this is what I really love to talk about. There are a few things just to keep in mind when we talk about admissions. College selection is, of course, first and foremost. We're making a list of the different schools we're looking at. Competitive positioning, right? Part of what Michael and I are trying to drive home tonight, especially as COVID is happening, is that you or your child, your student is a hot commodity, right? I think there's this temptation to think of college selection and admissions as this on high power speaking down to a decision. I like to encourage folks to think about it more as an open discussion, right? You are going to be entering a community and contributing to a community. So this is more of a discussion and not so much awaiting a final decision. Legacy is something to think about. If there's a history of a particular school in your family, that can sometimes work to your advantage. Resume building is huge, right? We don't want to go crazy. We don't want to put unnecessary pressure on our students today who are already doing so much. But to encourage our students to point out the things that they love, the things they've already been doing through your family, through your church, through their extracurriculars at school, and really letting themselves show on paper who they are in the world. That ties into leadership, right? You have young leaders in your household, and they're going to go to college and become slightly older leaders in college and go on to build a trajectory and get some support for that. So all of this is what we have in mind as we go into the admissions and application process. Now, college selection is important, right? People talk about their lists and how to split them up. It's a thoughtful process and it's an effective process. It can take a good amount of research and poking around. We just want to touch on a few things to keep in mind as you are building your list, which, by the way, we tend to recommend has 5, maybe 6 schools on it. The things to consider are always going to be important, whether COVID exists or not, right? This is where you get to decide what you want to lean into and what you don't really care about as much. Where is that value in your cost of college going to come from? For some folks, it is distance from home. I know when I went to college, I said, I love the Twin Cities, but I cannot wait to try something new because I have an excuse to, right? Climate kind of plays into that. I didn't make a super wise decision. I went to Chicago, so it wasn't that different from here, but some folks are ready to get some sun, get into a different climate and try something new. Urban or rural settings play into that as well. Maybe you grew up in one and you want to try the other. Maybe you grew up in one and you really want to stay there. It's important to keep in mind. Family values and social environment go hand in hand. You want to go to a place that really supports open exploration and critical thinking, but where you know you have a home base culturally and where you can feel comfortable. Alumni employment is an interesting thing to look at. You'll be surprised when you start to look into different schools, how many alumni from those schools all of a sudden pop up onto your social scene in everyday life. It's interesting to hear their testimonials and to ask them about their time. Prestige is a big thing, right? Name recognition of schools still matters whether it should or not. And there are a lot of different opinions around this, but I will say this is less about those Ivies. It's more about what you want to study, right? Go for schools that you know are really, really great and have resources for you in the area of interest you have. Graduation rates and class size are sort of the most logistical, and I end on those because those are really, really important numbers, right? We want to do everything we can to start at a place and end at that same place. It doesn't always work that way, and we can make a backup plan if we need to, but our plan A is always going to be to make an investment that we know we can see through. And so we benefit and the school benefits from that. School and class size just means how much attention do you want in the types of classes you're taking, right? I wanted a really small private school experience and that's what I got. Not everybody wants that, and it's important to look at a few different things to see what feels most natural.
Thanks, Madison. As we look at the importance of this, we'll talk more about the academic piece and the standardized testing, but having this landscape change, building relationship with these schools for the reasons that Madison is discussed and highlighting what is attractive to you so you avoid that first-year mistake, turning a 4-year process into a 5-year problem. Or more, and building a relationship to find out if it's the right fit, both in terms of making yourself attractive to that school to be engaged with, but also to visit them and whether that's virtually now or in person can help establish those relationships, get a sense of what of those elements are most important. Academically, this is an interesting one. Now, I know the last year or so has been incredibly difficult with the transition for students that are going through grade school life right now. The hybrid environment, the uncertainty of what we're facing right now as we move into the fall is obviously changing this in the short term, but it's also having dramatic impacts in that higher ed on the long term. As we talk about this though, as schools move away from standardized testing, I would argue that some of these things still are very present and become even a little bit more emphasized. Unfortunately, as much as we try to say grades don't matter, they do. If we're looking at this as we talk about the admissions relevancy, if I'm an admissions counselor or a financial aid person, my job description in a few words is to recruit future graduates. That I'm going to be combing through applications and prospective students to find people that are going to come, stay, and finish in 4 years. Then we can promote their good doings in the world on our alumni magazine and promote the things that our students do when they leave here. Because that's going to attract the next future graduate. And we want to make the right decision on those. And so what can we look at? Things like GPA. Some are still going to use the standardized test scores. But what else is there? In highly engaged relationships, we're going to know more than just that. They're going to be a name and a face, not just an application. So it's hard to quantify that, but it's very real, especially in these changing times. The other part that we would say is in the world today is the dynamic education of being able to be adaptable, to be able to take new information, to apply it and to changing conditions. This is that flexibility of skills is something that the workplace and higher education is looking for. A big part of that is simply being able to synthesize, to process and synthesize information. It's not just about taking the test, but it really helps. We are still tested on standardized ways. Kids are going to continue to have tests. A big part of it is not, a lot of times, having been a high school AP teacher, is not about whether or not they have the capacity for the content. It's can they process it fast enough to then synthesize it into a response that actually qualifies as a correct answer. Whether that's a multiple choice, an essay, a short answer, whatever that environment is, we're seeing that is still important. Those skills, whether it's are skills, it's not just whether they're aptitude. Developing those in different ways can have a huge impact. Now, again, as I mentioned, if we're looking at those predictors, investing in that process of a standardized test score. Schools have said that they are not going to consider standardized tests. In some cases, it's optional or not required at all. I hate to be a skeptic. It's early in the process. But knowing what admissions offices have to do in protecting the prestige of their institution, I'm trying to figure out a way, if I'm going to be a betting person, I have two equal candidates, one with a high ACT score and a great resume, and one without an ACT score and a great resume, but I got to pick one. I have a hard time believing human nature isn't going to want to pick the one that has a known entity, even if it's not perfect. Now, I could be completely wrong, and that will maybe see as we see policies develop over time, but it is something that's very real in the short term. Standardized test scores do matter. Things we talk about, many schools are providing more and more preparation with that. And some people have even sought to go through private remediation for specific skills. I won't get into that right now for the evening's message. What I would also point out, though, is schools have increasingly provided, with this cost of college, is provided pathways to earn credits early. Through AP programs, baccalaureate programs, post-secondary partnerships with local community colleges, and even CLEP exams, which have been kind of a mainstay in the homeschooling networks, are ways for students to gain credits before they actually step onto campus. Now, just like a diversified investment portfolio, be cautious for what you invest your time and resources in. Being overweighted might be a good thing or not, depending on what path your student takes, because institutions take these credits that students can earn in high school differently. They're more applicable in some areas than others, but they can greatly impact the total out-of-pocket cost you might have to pay or your student has to pay. Okay. When you probably thought you would tune in tonight, you probably thought it was going to be right down to nitty-gritty numbers and analysis of how you're going to pay for this. We're there, but I can't emphasize how important those first two areas are in our current landscape. That being said, we're going to try to go through some of the financial strategies and things to be aware of. This is not about where to put the money, what the best account is, or about the end result of saving. It's the strategy before that. How do we lower the out-of-pocket cost and be an informed consumer and student that as we consider these schools? So we're going to look at the merit-based aid, need-based aid, briefly the appeals and funding sources, and the tax credits, and a couple case study examples. Got a lot to cover in a very short period of time, so I'm going to get going. $200 billion approximately is the amount of financial aid that's out there. It's a pretty sizable sum. But how is it divided up? This is an important first step. Again, knowing the landscape, not just the strategy. Of that amount, about 58% is either in loans or grants. Now, it's really important. People joke about what, if I said I'm going to give you a $100 loan or a $100 grant, which one are you going to take? Most of you are kind of laughing and saying, of course, the grant. Parents are funny when they get financial aid awards. That piece of information gets lost sometimes. Loans versus grants make a big deal, but they also make some of the loans that the federal government provides are the best out there. But 58% of that financial aid comes from the federal government. About 7% comes from state governments. Generally, this is going to be area topic specific. They're trying to develop certain industries in a local geography. They're trying to attract young professionals into a certain area or enhance an industry through different incentives. And then you get to the endowments, the colleges themselves. 28% of that is the endowments. These are the funds, the institutional textbooks, if you will. These can be massive amounts in the billions down to a few hundred thousand, depending on the institution. How those schools decide to give those out vary by the type of institution they are. Yale, for example, has an endowment that the interest alone could cover the undergraduate cost of attendance for every student. They don't choose to distribute it that way, but that's how big the levers that these institutions can have are very different. But important to know that the top 26% or top quarter of an incoming class typically receives the 80% of the institutional grant money at any given university. So that lever, again, can be very important. Here's the part that shocks many people is the 7%, the scholarships, the private scholarships. Now, there's a couple things to be aware of this. One is the percentage that they actually represent in the landscape of, the Rotary scholarships, local boosters, things that students often chase, spend a lot of time writing essays on the weekends. Wonderful endeavor to help to defray the cost of college, but understand, depending on your situation, it may or may not be to your benefit. Because that award, $2,000 scholarship from the Rotary, has to be reported with your financial aid, and that might affect your future financial aid from the institution dollar for dollar because they realize that you've got resources coming from elsewhere. And that could be something that could have been a repeated ongoing benefit. So understanding that there's still value in those scholarships, but if we're going to choose where we're going to try to investigate and understand where we can maybe incrementally get more aid, maybe not in just private employer grants and scholarships. What are some things that your student could do in the community, in their own profile of building relationship and doing something unique that makes them an attractive student to a local institution community? Somewhere where an admissions counselor maybe would want to incentivize them through increased aid in the process to attract them to that campus. All right. So now we need to just look at the lowest hanging fruit between merit and need-based aid. Now, another takeaway from tonight is not only understand out-of-pocket cost, but also say, no matter what you think your financial position is, everyone should file for the FAFSA, the free application for financial aid, for federal student aid. Because some private scholarships, some merit-based aid at different institutions that you may be eligible for, even if you're not financially in need, may be contingent on you filing for aid first. It's kind of like an insurance claim. They want to see if someone else is going to pay for it first. And if there's free government aid, they want to know it's there. But applying for that process starts on October 1st. Showing interest in getting your aid it's first come, first serve. And for most institutional aid, as they go through this process, getting your financial aid application and getting this process started early in the fall is incredibly important. Here we are on October 5th. If you have a senior in high school right now, you should be very proactively seeking to start filling out your FAFSA. Depending on your situation, that timing can be very important. If your student hasn't already started to identify schools for application, highly encourage that starts to be the part of the process sooner than later. Juniors and sophomores and younger, you have some time, but now is the time to be considering some of these things, to be aware of it as we look at other elements of financial aid and how it's impacted. Some schools may, when you file that, you're going to get a student aid report, which will report your EFC, your expected family contribution. Now, I have to stop for a second and point this out. This is not how much they expect that you have in your bank account or savings account for college. It's how they are distributing, prioritizing who gets what aid. It is a number that is an expectation that you participate in the process, but it doesn't mean that they think you have this in your cash flow or savings account. But that EFC is going to be used across any institution that your student applies for and will determine financial aid. At about 10% of these institutions, there's an additional form that they may ask you. It's called the CSS profile. It's another set of questions. They ask more detailed questions, but it's for those institutions that maybe have more aid that they can distribute, but they want to be certain they're giving it to the families and students that need it most. When you apply for that financial aid, that FAFSA, and you do it at any institution, how they distribute it is highly going to be dependent on the type of institution we're looking at. Now, I unfortunately for time have to kind of skip through this, but a school like the Ivy League distributes their aid very differently than a school like Wisconsin River Falls. One, because of their prestige. Two, because of their endowment. Three, because one is private and one is public. Again, can have a dramatic impact on the kind of experience or the actual out-of-pocket cost depending on your family's situation. The point I will point out as we get through this is with the need-based aid, as we talk about this, the difference between need-based aid and merit-based aid is simply the fact that need-based is showing financial need. Merit is the process of you have some unique skill, trait, ability that institution wants to incentivize or reward to come onto campus. So if you're the best tuba player this side of the Mississippi, the Wisconsin Marching Band might offer you a scholarship that an ordinary student might not get. But if you have financial need, you're in dire circumstances, you will probably get other financial aid before that merit comes through. So, let's look at a couple case studies and kind of illustrate what this looks like. We're going to start with that need-based aid. First of all, the cost of attendance, $25,000. That was the school sticker price. Your EFC came in based on income and assets at $10,000. Your expected financial need is about $15,000. That is your demonstrated need. Need-based aid is going to come in each institution provides for that need. Just because you show that need at a particular institution doesn't mean they're going to provide the financial aid to cover that. It just shows what you might qualify for. So we look at a couple things. What is your cost of attendance? We determine your actual need. Then we look at what's the need met ratio. A school with a 100% need met ratio will offer $15,000 of financial aid. That could be in grants, loans, or scholarship, tuition discounts. A school with a 50% need met will only cover half of that. So, just to be clear, that $10,000 you're responsible for in that EFC, now you have to find that gap. There's that additional gap of $7,500 that you would be responsible for any given year's tuition. The second part of this is then the need met, or the gift aid ratio. So within that financial aid package the school provides based on their need met ratio that they might look at, a typical student, there's going to be a gift aid ratio. Now, a gift is exactly what it sounds like. This is going to be the free money, the grants, the scholarships, the tuitions that you don't have to pay back. And schools that have a high gift aid ratio are pretty attractive because that financially, if you demonstrate $15,000 of need and that school has an 80% gift aid ratio with 100% need met, that means they're going to give you $12,000 and you have $3,000 worth of loans, but those are usually going to be covered by favorable federal loans that we can cover these costs. Again, with a school with only a 30% gift aid ratio, you see that number becomes much lower. That out-of-pocket cost could be very different even though the school has the exact same cost of attendance. Again, we want to make sure we understand with each school. So as Madison pointed out, we want students to apply for at least 6 schools, not find the perfect school, but find several schools that we think would be great fits for our student, and hopefully they're spearheading this. That student I showed you with Bethany from St. Olaf, that was their second choice. But what we found was the comparable school, the first choice, the one emotionally wanted to go a little bit more, was going to cost about $40,000 more. And they decided St. Olaf's a pretty good place. All right, let's look at another example. We'll take an example of 2 schools. One has a $35,000 cost of attendance. School B is a school has $25,000 cost of attendance. But the EFC, you'll see, is the same. It's still $10,000. We apply it at both schools, and there's a need of $25,000 at school A, $15,000 at school B. At school A, though, not only do they meet 100% of that need, 80% of that need that they meet is gift aid. That comes in the form of a $20,000 grant or scholarship. At school B, they only meet 60% of that gap, that $15,000. So that $9,000 financial aid package also only includes 50% gift aid. So while it's $25,000 cost of attendance, they're providing only $4,500 of gift aid. And when we look at what someone will pay at school A versus school B, let's break it down. There's a $15,000 out-of-pocket cost. Where does that come from? $10,000 of EFC that's going to apply to any institution. There was a $20,000 scholarship and $5,000 of additional financial aid loans. Total cost out of pocket, $15,000. At school B, that out-of-pocket cost is $20,500. That EFC of $10,000 we see still applies. They got a $4,500 gift. There was a loan associated with it, which can be deferred and paid over time. But with the out-of-pocket cost, the EFC of $10,000 plus $4,500 of loans and a $6,000 gap. This is when we see families come in in the ninth inning, and they come at the last moment, and they're trying to figure out, wait a minute, where do we come up with this? This is where we see 401k loans. Tuition bill is due in October, and all of a sudden they got a $6,000 gap. Where do I get it? The least efficient, when we make emotional decisions just in time, they're maybe not as most informed. As we go through this process, not only is it a financial decision, but as you understand this, I want to point out something that's very important. I would argue there's not a more emotional decision that you're making, and you have infinite love for your children, but you have limited resources that you can distribute to your children, especially at various specific points in time. If you are not planful and strategic about how you might solve this problem, you may find yourself in a situation where love will win 99.9% of the time. And you will make financial decisions that may not be in your best interest to solve the love problem of making sure your son or daughter gets to stay in school. That's what we see on an ongoing basis. And we try to help people navigate this up front. Now, COVID, for other reasons, we've learned that community college can be a great option. Absolutely, for certain specific careers. There's no reason to overinvest in your education if you can find pathways that are great for your son or daughter. I will say that they can be stepping stones. But what we can say is transfer students, the data shows, do not get the same amount of financial aid as native first-year students. And so you may save in that capacity, but we're also seeing, because of the COVID effect, that schools may be flexible because they want to attract students. So this is an unknown, but we don't want to defer or just assume that just going to community college is going to save you. It may or may not be the case, again, depending on your situation. We would argue that the best way to approach this is it the best pathway for the career you're looking at? Okay. I know I'm running at time here, and I apologize. I hope this is still, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, and I think we have to continue at least to get these next few slides. So please bear with me. Our financial aid FAFSA is about a 36-page document. With technology, they've simplified this process. It's not as daunting as it used to be for people to fill out this form. What's important to know is it's based on 4 major factors. It's going to be the income of the parents, the assets of the parents, the income of the student, and the assets of the student. Simply said, they're all treated differently. So how you hold assets can have a dramatic impact on how your aid might be distributed. Quick example, Aunt Emma gives a $10,000 gift. An accountant might tell you to put it in an UGMA or an UTMA account. We see this all the time. Let's just say that account earns 5% return. Now, for tax reasons, that might be wonderful for your family. For the parents, to have it in the student's name, they pay child tax, kiddie tax rates. However, if you're eligible for financial aid, what this might do could have a significant, up to a $2,000 reduced eligibility because student assets are assessed at 20%, whereas at most, parent assets in that same account would be assessed at 5.64%. So that could be best case scenario, have zero impact on aid. It costs you a little bit more in taxes, but it's worst case, it's 560, but let's also say that this could play out over 4 to 5 years. What is the net impact on this? It could be significant. The other thing that's important is understanding that those assets and income are based on two different timelines. And the timeline on how assets are distributed becomes imperative in the strategic planning. This is just one student's timeline. If you have multiple students, you can see where this gets really messy and ugly and complicated. However, understanding when you file the FAFSA, it's as of the date you file, and using the tax return from 2 years ago. So this year's sophomores, if your student is a sophomore, it is going to be your 2021 tax return that actually determines their first year of college financial aid. So there's some strategic planning if you have control, especially if you're a business owner, that can impact this. But on an asset standpoint, it's the day you file the FAFSA. So if you've got $50,000 in your bank account and you're going to buy a new truck on October 2nd, you might want to wait to file the FAFSA till October 3rd. Because when you file it on October 1st and you've got $50,000, the FAFSA report is not going to know that that's for a truck. They're going to see that as an asset for college. So just that simple strategy could save you thousands of dollars, just understanding the timing of when you do this. This is also an important time to point out when you get money from maybe grandparents. We see a lot of grandparent 529s and funding when that comes in. The timing of that becomes imperative because if it comes in at a time when you're still filing, it might be gifted to your son or daughter. It counts as an untaxed resource. Untaxed resources can be affected by 50% on your financial aid for students if it goes to them, versus just holding them themselves. Whereas if you wait till the right time, it would have no impact. So when we look at the different tools, there's many wonderful tools to save for college. How they're distributed is becoming more and more important in making them efficient. I would also include one thing, if there's a unique situation scenario, is if there's a split family. If we're talking and there's two different households, it's not by who has the tax credit. It's more about where did that student sleep that one extra day in the year. So if it's 50-50 in terms of custody for your son or daughter, and that wherever they laid their head one extra day, that year is what will, in the year leading up to the FAFSA, is what will determine who claims them on the FAFSA return. It's going to have a dramatic impact, again, if there's a high income earner and a low income earner based on that household. It can be the difference of literally tens of thousands of dollars in certain situations. Finally, the last thing we'll talk briefly is the American Opportunity Tax Credit. We want to highlight it all. Again, understanding how this coordinates with other savings is very important. This is free money. This is if you spend if $4,000 of qualified tuition expenses are spent out of pocket, you are going to receive a $2,500 tax credit back on your next tax return. It's dollar for dollar for the first $2,000. This is one of the most valuable ones, depending on your modified adjusted gross income. If you're $160,000 or less, you would qualify for this, and this is up to $10,000, so 4 years for every student in your family. But you have to be careful not to coordinate it with your 529 plans or other assets you may use, because you may disqualify yourself from one or the other. Again, order of use of your assets. Now, there are other credits and tax and deductions that may apply to your family. We would recommend that you talk to your tax advisor, your CPA, to make sure you qualify and you claim them effectively. This is a great time if you're going through this process and trying to take advantage of that, not to use TurboTax. They may catch it, but it may be helpful to have a conversation with someone. Have a the difference between that tax credit and deduction. If eligible, that American AOTC, American Opportunity Tax Credit, it's wonderful. All right.
All right, I would like to pass forward here a few questions, if
Sure.
I could, that have come in while you have been presenting. The first one is this. Question about selection. How can you find out true statistics from schools? Every college visit this person has had, the leaders would skew the numbers, so it was hard to compare apples to apples.
Oh, that's such a good question. I love that we have critical thinkers out there in the search. That's great. I'm going to give an anecdotal approach, and I'm sure that Michael has a different approach, but because I worked at a graduate level and then partnered with a lot of undergraduate levels, I know that one of the ways to get around skewed statistics is to actually work through the student admission representatives that offices hire, right? You'll have admissions professionals in every office, and they'll try to give you real talk, but sometimes you have questions about those numbers. If you really want to know about the experience at a school, and every school will hire student representatives, let me tell you what, if there's anyone who's going to let you know how things are at a school, it's going to be those students. So that's always my recommended starting point, because that helps build that relationship that Michael's talking about, right? It's not you just taking in some numbers and determining which ones are right. It's you reaching out, showing initiative, building connections with other people, and maybe getting some solid answers in the meantime.
And as far as the specific data and like digging into those numbers, I think each school provides it in different ways. To be just really transparent, we pay for that data, and so we distill it to side by side, so we kind of look at it individually by schools. You can find it in various sources, but sometimes you have to dig. It becomes a time investment. In some cases, you might just have to call individual schools. If there's specific data, like graduation rates, 4-year to, is it, the 4, 5, or 6-year graduation rates are listed as a 6-year window, not just 4-year. So getting specific information may be just one, knowing the right questions to ask and taking the time when you can't find it for a particular school to reach out to them directly. And the more you can ask specific questions, the more likely they're going to give you some real data, because you're going to come in informed rather than just tell me your numbers.
All right. Next question. Some people say, why bother with saving for college? I can't save enough anyway. How do you respond to this?
Also a very good question. I want to throw some affirmations out there. I understand the temptation, and I do want to name that depending on your family's financial situation, sometimes college savings doesn't feel like a real option, right? I just want to put that out there. Sometimes, it can appear like you're wealthy or appear like we're doing okay. Sometimes you have a student who's super talented and could go anywhere if money weren't an issue. But I say if you're not sure about your saving strategy, depending on the timeline you have, it's really good to talk with somebody, because debt can be used as a strategy, right? We saw $189 billion of aid up there, right? People rely on debt. We just want to be sure that we do it on purpose and that we have a reasoning behind it if we're going to use that. That's how I frame that question.
And I think it depends on the goal. I mean, we say education's a goal, but what is the priority in your plan? What's reasonable given your household situation, given your retirement plans? We didn't get time to spend on that, but that we would argue that that's important. And as Madison was pointing out, college has become an incredible investment. Most people don't pay for their house in cash, their residence. It's not feasible. But having a plan how you're going to afford it, the mortgage, the things that come with it, you take some time to really make sure, and there's some filters that make sure you can do that, but it really becomes understanding what levers you can pull and then filtering your search to say what are reasonable options that we can consider that fit within our budget and fit within our students' goals and fit within our household plan. And it may be that there's debt, it may be that you can cash flow, and it may be parts and savings. But we have to prioritize where does education fall in the absolute goals of the household.
Yeah, it's less about giving up and throwing your hands up. It's more about redefining your terms, right? And that could look different year to year as your student is in college, so it's okay to revisit that. But the intentionality is going to be the number one thing, right? Number one thing.
Okay. Next question. Should I negotiate financially with the college of my students' choosing? How and when does this work?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Could you repeat that?
Should I negotiate financially with the college of my students' choosing? How and when does this work?
Oh, you guys, I feel like someone's paying you to ask these great questions. So I have a lot of experience with this coming out of admissions and financial aid. My short answer is you absolutely can negotiate. I don't know that negotiate is the best word you want to use when you think about it. So what I will say is the most important thing in the how is that the student is leading the initiative, right? Parents are a huge part of the financing, but this is where student ownership really, really needs to come in. Your student needs to know the questions they want to ask and the answers they want to get, and your student needs to head up this interaction. It's usually not a good thing if parents accompany the student or have anything to do with these discussions in general. So really encourage your student to take this on if this is their #1 school and they think there might be something there, because you never do know. We just want to make sure there's no entitlement in the room, right? You're coming in to have a discussion, maybe not a negotiation. You're coming in to even see what's possible, because we don't always know what's possible. It's much more exploratory in nature than it is about a hard line, and that's what I like to encourage for folks. Most admissions offices will play ball with this because they're curious too, and they have some skin in the game as well. So if you can have a lot of respect coming in, have the student lead it, and have it be an amiable process, absolutely go for it.
And I think yes, this right now is a time where it can't hurt to ask respectfully. Along that same line, having multiple applications and multiple aid offers allows you to have some context to know what your out-of-pocket costs might be at other schools. So you can go to your favorite school and be very specific about the ask. And you can say, could you meet us halfway? Could you meet us with, if you give a very specific amount, I think that helps. If you give this is what it would take to get me here, and be honest about that. If that's truly why you're going in, be a great reason. If there's a different change, a COVID-related change, that your situation has changed, that's a different conversation. And that is fair play to say job loss, catastrophic financial situation. So I want, not knowing what that situation is, it's important to note that that's a different conversation than just trying to see if we can get a better deal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. To try to have specifics when it comes to the numbers is important, but if you can frame the conversation in why it's important to you that you want to be there, if you can say, here's what I see in this community, here's what I think I can bring, and I can't think about any other school like I'm thinking about this school, make that the center of the conversation. The money then factors in, right? Yeah. But we never want to just root down in the numbers alone.
Okay, so is it better to have my child apply for scholarships or spend more time on grades and activities and building their resume?
There's no way of knowing in absolute terms. I know which way I would counsel my daughter, because I think that becomes more reflective of actual participation in this world and in our community. That if she was actually going out and doing things, leading things, having impact on others, or things in our community that she can share, I think the future of the college landscape is heading in that direction, not just that she can write a great essay. And at the end of the day, for me as a parent, I'd rather her having taken that initiative to just be a good person and to be a leader in our community for the right reasons. And whether or not she gets into the school she wants, I think that should be secondary anyway. Education can happen anywhere.
Even scholarships are about who your student is as a person, right? I always encourage students to think of themselves as just like being a human being for a living, and you're just telling the school about it, right? You don't want to fake something or maybe push something or stretch something to try to go for that extra money. So if you're in a community and you're in a leadership position somewhere that gives scholarships, why not? Yep. Slam dunk, swish, there we go. If that's something that's naturally going to occur and that's a resource available to you, absolutely. If it's organic and it already matches what you're doing, then it's not really so much extra work to go after it. It's just a great resource. Otherwise, if you're going to have to force something to get a private scholarship, I don't think there's much point in the time, the cost-benefit analysis.
And as we look at students today, that again, from the teacher perspective, seeing how busy, they're the busiest people I know, is the really involved high school student. They're in so many programs, activities, extracurriculars. They're already doing these things. To spend more time academically for a lot of those kids are tough. It's tough. So that's another piece that we started to see.
So short of hiring professional help to evaluate financial costs of several colleges at once, is there an easy way for a layperson to get an apples-to-apples comparison?
You know, I love our human resources in this area. So there are a lot of great college coaches. And I know you're kind of like, all right, well, I have my tax person, I have a financial person, we have admissions teams, but there are actually people who do this for a living, who are college coaches, and who can pull those resources for you and show you the sources they're using to walk with your student however they structure their program. So in my work with college planning, I have a couple partners in the community who are great resources for me because I'm not in that world anymore. I'm not getting the numbers I used to get. And so I always say there are people out there making a living doing this, and they're just phenomenal.
Yeah, and if you're really isolated to your own resources, you know, each school typically has a net price calculator. The College Board website has wonderful information on lots of schools. So again, it's the same organization that administers the ACT and the advanced placement, the AP exams. Those are great resources to kind of as a hub of information that anyone can go to and at least gather some basic stuff and some good exploration tools.
Okay, and our last question. My child is still early in high school. How do you think the pandemic is going to reshape the college and university landscape?
Oh, if I had a crystal ball. I think in my own experience, what I'm starting to hear from folks is a real emphasis on students as the focus of the college experience, right? So we're seeing schools lower their prices to try to be more attractive and accessible. We're seeing schools trying to accommodate students in new ways. A lot of this is on the admissions end, right? It doesn't necessarily work through the whole program. It's really on the welcoming end, but we're seeing a different kind of hospitality and a different kind of orientation in that supply-demand model where all of a sudden the student is that much more important. So just to have a sense of your comfort in your own skin going into a college search and to have a sense of what it is you would like to ask for, to think of yourself as an active, efficacious agent in this search, I think is probably more pronounced than ever before.
I think the consumer is going to have more, as just again, kind of the analytic side of it, consumer is going to have more leverage if they know how to use it. And if you pursue the right experience, I think you're going to have more choice. And I think it's going to be, because schools need to stay present, they need enrollment. And so they're going to try to do what they can to be more student-oriented, to attract people and make it reasonable for them to be there.
I think it's good news. I know it's really anxious right now, but I think it's good news for the college search.
All right. Do we have any final slides? Is there anything that you want to bring up before we close?
All we were going to share with folks is that we know this is rapid fire. We know that we are talking a mile a minute, and we're covering huge topics, right? That's sort of the spirit of education. What Michael and I want to be able to offer is a way to make this tangible and a way to personalize it if you are struggling to make sense of it all or if you want some backup making sense of it all, right? We offer a part 2 of this educational process.
Yeah, in partnership, we just say that, as part of the education, we agree if people want to follow up, we'll offer a session where we will do a quick high-level EFC report, kind of see if there's any immediate strategies that maybe you should be thinking about in your situation. And again, it is to honor the experience that you're having here. It's not a bait and switch. It's truly just going to be more information on a personal level to your situation. You get a walkaway report. You'll get some basic information, maybe if you have some schools that you have already on your list. If you do, I'll let Madison kind of explain how you might want to get in touch with us.
Yeah, everyone likes to do this a little differently. So if you are rip-roaring ready to go and you just want to reach out to me and Michael, we've put our contact information up here. That is totally fine. There's actually a link right there where you can put ourselves on our calendars. We are hosting primarily virtual meetings right now, just out of respect for COVID. If there is an issue and you really want to meet in person, we can mask up and we can figure that out. But we have our calendar and our contact information available here and are happy to take requests. Pastor Gail has also volunteered to sort of be an intermediary and to take any inquiries or curiosities you have and pass them along to us, or any interest in meeting. Really, it's very simple. We set aside about an hour to do this high-level analysis with you, and all you need to bring in is top-ahead knowledge about your financial situation, some quick numbers and balances, and maybe your latest tax return to help us out.
Well, thank you both, Michael and Madison, and thank you to all of you who have been watching this video. You will be able to see this later, too, if you didn't have a chance to listen to the whole session tonight. Hopefully, we answered some of your questions, and maybe we've created a few more. But if you have more questions that you would like to ask, you can certainly send them to me, Pastor Gail, at standrewlu.org, and I will make sure that your questions get forwarded to our friends here from Thrivent. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.